Hi, so my name's Paul Coulton, and this talk isn't really about urban futures per se, but the practice of futuring as a discipline almost, in that as architects and designers, we're future focused. We're often changing current situations into more preferable ones. So we're inherently focused on the future as a discipline, but I think we need to challenge the way that we've created futures. All the problems that people have been talking about today are designed. They're created by us. And so we're implicated in the necessity to change that. And to put it perhaps more simply, as we future, we also defuture. By creating certain preferable futures, we defuture other possibilities. Um, in the design of products to create a throwaway culture, we defutured the planet arguably by creating more unsustainable ones. But the philosopher Tony Fry also gives us a way out. He says that actually the way to address this is to create alternate futures that challenge these ongoing imaginaries and break them apart. And so I want to look at the way that we future and think about, is it right? Is it good? Is it equitable? Does it create the transitions that Carlos talks about? And often the way it's done is through this, which I call the dreaded futures cone. And any course you go on futures and talk to a futurist, invariably they drag this thing out. And it's very beguiling. It kind of tells of a point in time at the present. We move to the future. And then things become probable, more likely to happen in this area, plausible, things that could happen. It's a bit wider on this cone. And then possible things that might happen. And as designers and architects, we're often in this cone, which is movable between the other spaces, in that we're trying to create more preferable futures. And it's interesting, Voros wasn't an actual designer or an architect, he was an economist. And that's probably why this graph goes up and to the right, which is the kind of favored approach of most economists. But inherently, it's problematic. And the reason it's problematic, I think I will address. For a start, it starts at the present. It has no view of the past. And Marshall McLuhan famously says that we look through the present through a rear view mirror, we march backwards into the future. In other words, when we're trying to create futures, we often reference them to things that we already know or already experience. So our view of the future is inherently bound up in the past. But there's a historicity to that, in that it assumes also that our histories are all is an accepted reality. Actually, history is a contested space. It's not the same for everybody. What I believe is history is not necessarily what somebody else believes is history. So you can't ignore the past when you're thinking about the futures, or somebody's view of the past, which might be different. The other aspect is time. Time is a human construct. We represent things in human time that we've bound up. We've colonized the world with Western time, pretty much. But time and temporality don't work the same for everybody, but it's been imposed. So we can't think of this kind of nice, neat line that everything moves along in this kind of nice trajectory as the way it naturally be. The other thing that it doesn't think about is the values and beliefs that we have and bring with us when we're considering what the future might be. In games, we used to talk about this notion of the magic circle, which is a kind of point in the middle of a game where the rules and the artifacts, and it used to be described by the philosopher Heidegger as a place dedicated for an actor part. But actually, increasingly, as game designers, we know that that's not true. You don't isolate yourself in a game. You bring in your past experience in the environment, your social norms, what it's like to be a good sport or a good player, and the notions of fair play. Those are all things that we bring into the experience. And our values and beliefs and the cultural context. As Carlos said, things that you assume are culturally correct for you might not necessarily be right for somebody else. So without thinking about those in the terms of futuring, then how do we adequately create more equitable futures? The other thing that it doesn't think about is fiction. And fiction is a really powerful aspect of futuring in the sense that it's the books we read, the films we look. If fiction wasn't important, then we wouldn't have everybody thinking cats drink milk when they're in fact lactose intolerant. A more powerful example is the image on the right, which is Belgetti's famous Futurama, which was a view of American cities created for the World's Fair in 1939, and it presented it as a kind of game ride where you flew over this city with sleek highways and intersections and essentially a grid system, and it essentially set the model for American cities going forward. Perhaps what's not often understood is that that Futurama was sponsored by GM, the motor manufacturer. And so to create a future in which cars dominate was obviously in GM's interest. And we see this in all these kind of technological views of the future. They're selling you a future in which it makes sense for them to deliver. So whether it's Musk with his colonial project for Mars or Meta with the metaverse, they're selling a future that they will deliver, not necessarily that's desirable. So we can't dismiss fiction as not being important because it radically affects the people. If it didn't matter, I wouldn't spend half my discussions about AI talking about killer robots and Skynet. When it's actually the mundane AI you want to be worried about, Netflix monitoring what you're doing on your television watching, or Google storing all your search. Those are the AIs you want to worry about. Not the killer robots, although there will be killer robots. So we have to think about preferable to who, or what is probably more interesting, in that we tend to think about preferable from a human-centered perspective. And actually, arguably, that's primarily what the problem's been, certainly within design. So I actually turn to an alien phenomenology in the fact that we think of everything as part of the world, not just humans, whether it's my shoes, a plant, an animal, a thought in my head can be a thing in the world. It doesn't mean that all those things are equal or in terms of power, but we can think about all those different aspects. So we don't center the human as the object of our design desire, but rather do designs that think about us as part of larger assemblages or ecologies of things that is more complex. And this is a diagram of example of, so this is taken from a future proposed by Continental, which is essentially this dog drone delivery system. So the dog brings you packages from Amazon and drops them on your doorstep, and it can climb up blocks of flats. It's not very good at walking a long distance, so they come in a bus, and you can go online and watch this video, and there's all these little dogs come out this bus and deliver packages nowadays. If we're looking at a kind of human-centered design perspective, which is often a view of simplicity, we tend to focus on your interaction with the ordering through the web, or the interaction with drone. We don't think about these other things. We don't think about the data centers that all your data is going to. Huge amounts of resources are being consumed in data centers in deserts out in California or other parts of the world. So data isn't, the cloud thing, it sounds great. It sounds like this fluffy, lovely, ephemeral thing, but it's actually just computer stuff somewhere, consuming energy and consuming minerals. So we can take these alternate perspectives. We can also think about business models as things with enormous power and influence. Google doesn't give you stuff for free. They give you stuff so that they can mine you and sell you adverts. So you're essentially part of the product of these things. But often the design aspects of it filters those out. And so my model isn't a cone. It comes from a Brazilian philosopher, Alvarez Vieira Pinto, who talked about not the future or the past, but a creative present that we can make actions upon and create the transitions that Carlos, which includes our histories, our realities, our beliefs, our values, our perception, and as the Zapistas put it, to create a world in which many worlds fit. So there isn't a single future, but multiple futures, and allowing all these futures to exist within the world rather than promote a single, arguably dominant one. And to put it in practice, I'll run through this fairly quickly. A lot of my work takes a look at patents, papers, and prototypes, and even science fiction, and takes emerging technologies and tries to think about them as what they would be like as domesticated in the present. So I try to create kind of experiential futures which concretize the future for people, particularly around AI and data at the moment. So this is a project I've got, which is a living room of the future, which is a project with the BBC, which you've probably seen the caravan hanging around the Leica building. But what's inside it is a kind of whole set of Internet of Things things. So there's the usual screen, surround sound. There's also facial and emotional detection. There's IoT lights that can be changed when the media changes. There's a fan that blows when the wind blows in the media. And there's also smart windows that turn on and off as the film starts. So it has just our own range of products, but it allows us to ask questions about our different relationships between the things themselves, but also the data and the AI that might control them. So these are some of the shots from inside. You can see the smart windows there. That's the face detector under there. This is a kind of little extra robot arm that comes out and scans your face if it can't detect your emotions very well. And what I'm interested in is, what are the experience? How do people negotiate with data and AI? And so this is a shot from inside the caravan of two people interacting with the AI who controls the caravan.
Based on your generally agreeable features, I have concluded that you consent to further profiling of your facial features. Yes?
Yes.
Okay, Will. Initial analysis suggests that you're a sucker for a romantic story. You're in for a treat. The drama will be right up your street.
I love a rom-com. How did it know?
Yeah, how did it know? And that's the question we often have to ask ourselves when dealing with a lot of these futures. How do they know what we want? How do they know what is preferable? And the disembodied AI voice is probably not the preferable future that we might want it to be. Okay, thank you.